I just wanted to go through a little bit. Uh-oh. Let's see. There we go. And tell you a little bit about the Family Enhancement Center. We're a relatively small nonprofit. We've been around for about 18 years. I've got to update this slide here. We work with kids of all ages and provide just a wide array of services. So most of the kids that come to us have been a victim of child abuse or neglect, or they're at risk for child abuse and neglect. So we work with them and their families, whether it's their foster family, their biological family, or sometimes a pre-adoptive family as well. Sometimes we're through the whole process. You know, sadly, we start with the biological family, go through the foster family, and end up with the pre-adoptive family. That's obviously not our hope, but that's the reality sometimes that we see that. We also are very committed to prevention of child abuse. So we do a lot of education. I go out to numerous places and talk to parents and families and staff of various agencies, trying to help figure out what we can do as a community to protect children from abuse. So I just want to just tell you one thing that's not on the slide, and it's a program at the Family Enhancement Center that I'm pretty excited about. And if you know clients, if you have kids on your caseload that would fit in this group, we would love it. It's a brand new program, and it's called Healing Motion. And the idea of this program is a group therapy for children who've experienced trauma. And the group is designed to help children heal from a more holistic way, rather than your traditional mental health where you're sitting down and talking to children, or even younger children. We're playing with them as the therapeutic mode. But research is really telling us that when children have had trauma, they need to involve their whole body in the recovery. And so I think you probably, if you're in at all mental health, if you see anything about mental health, you'll see like mindfulness is huge now. People are integrating a lot of different techniques in mental health treatment. Well, as it turns out, trauma is one of those things that's most easily healed with that whole mind-body approach. So Healing Motion is for kids that have had trauma. It's a weekly group, and what we do is we do yoga, other kinds of movement, as well as discussion about how you can work on your trauma effects. So, just a plug for that program. Okay, so now we're going to talk about child trauma. A lovely topic, right? It's actually an exciting topic because we're now learning a lot about kids, how they develop. We're learning a lot about the brain, things that I learned when I went to school maybe 30 years ago, completely turned on their head. You know, when I went to school, I was taught that kids' brains were done forming by 8, and pretty much what you had at 8 is, you know, what you're going to have. You can't change things. They haven't made an attachment by 8 to a caregiver. They never will. If they haven't, learned to regulate their emotions, they never will. Well, guess what? That's all turning out to not be true, which is really exciting. And it's also leading us into new techniques to use with kids. So it's really actually a wonderful time to be working on child trauma. The overview is 3 areas of trauma affects 3 areas in a broad sense. So it affects emotional regulation, it affects learning, and it affects relationship skills. So I'm just going to go through those a little bit. Does anyone know what emotional regulation is? No? Okay. So emotional regulation, that is, everybody has a skill in the area of emotional regulation. And what that skill is it keeps you on track. It keeps you from swearing at someone that you are angry at. It keeps you from falling asleep during my presentation. It keeps you focused when you're supposed to be learning something. Emotional regulation is your ability to get your mind and body in tune with what is needed at that time. So if you need to be calm and sit still, like I'm asking you to be calm and sit still here, you're able to do that. And if you get kind of dysregulated, and some of you already are because you've probably been sitting here for a really long long time. I notice you're going to move around a little bit. You're going to do things to kind of get yourself a little bit more regulated so you can like pay attention to me because you don't want to be rude and put your head down and fall asleep, right? You know, kids do that too. They're learning that skill. They're also learning how, you know, if someone cuts you off while you're driving, you know, to not, you know, ram your car into them, even though you feel really pissed off at the time, right? You know, we learn to calm down, we take a deep breath, whatever, but we talk to ourselves maybe, but we have skills that we use to keep ourselves kind of in line so that we can do what is asked of us. That's something, you know, at 2, emotional regulation skills, pretty much 0. That's why 2-year-olds lay on the floor and scream. They have no emotional regulation skills. They're disappointed, they scream, they cry, you know, sometimes for half an hour. As they get older, that skill grows. If kids have had trauma, the skill doesn't grow as easily, and there's some really interesting reasons for that, which if I had a couple hours, I'd tell you. But that's emotional regulation. And what happens, I'm going to give you just a little primer on emotional regulation. So basically, you can see on this scale, we have calm, alert, alarm, all the way up to terror. And that's kind of a way to think about how our emotional ups and downs can be viewed. And on the bottom, you see things, you know, situations in life. So, you know, you have rest, when you're hanging out watching TV or, you know, getting up in the morning. Something novel, that's just something new you haven't seen before. Challenge, stress, and danger. And if you look at the blue line, that represents a typical person's response. Okay? So you can see as something becomes, you know, something new comes into their world, they wake up a little bit, oh, what's that? Interesting, you know, they kind of pay a little better attention. As something gets challenging, they might get a little distressed. Their heart might beat a little bit faster. They might kind of worry, maybe a little pit in their stomach. They're like, what's going to happen here? And then if something's really scary, you know, you become alarmed. If you're walking down the street at night and you hear footsteps behind you and you go faster and they go faster, you know, your heart starts to race, your blood starts to pump, you breathe faster, you get ready to run if you have to or fight. Okay? That's normal. Everybody does that. The red line represents kids who have been impacted by trauma. So what you'll notice is that even something slightly novel gets them started up that alertness scale. And something that's new can get them into alarm. Challenges, they're almost in that terror state. So that's their internal. You don't necessarily know that by looking at them, but that's their internal state. So that's what they're coping with. And it's because of the trauma that they're wiring. It's almost like everything is just amped up. And so you can see how that might impact their life, their daily life, right? So what happens when we get amped up like that, our heart starts racing, our blood is pumping, we're breathing heavy, we get ready for what's called the flight or fight response. We all have that. Again, it's normal, it's healthy. You know, if you're being chased by a tiger, you need to have those skills. Most of us aren't being chased by tigers anymore, but we do still have dangers in our lives. We're still sometimes confronted, you know, someone, I don't know, you maybe have clients who scream at you, maybe they threaten you sometimes. So you do need to have those skills intact. Just not as often as we used to. But they're wired in. And kids have those too. So what ends up happening is they get into that fight or flight mode. Now let me ask you a question. If you are thinking someone's chasing you, someone's behind you, you're getting in that fight or flight response, and someone asks you to do a math problem, can you do it? No. And neither can kids. So when kids are amped up, what do we usually do? We try to reason with them. It doesn't work. They can't reason. You can't reason when you're all, you know, into that fight or flight mode. So when they're in that emotional mode, the talking solutions don't work. Rewards and punishments don't work either. Once you're in that mode, you don't remember the reward that you're working for, and you don't remember the punishment. You're just on a survival moment. So kids can tell you when they're calm what they should do. They can tell you the rewards they'll get if they do it, and they'll tell you the punishments. But in the moment, it's all gone. And so a lot of times people get very frustrated, parents get very frustrated with children who have this kind of neural response system because they don't respond as typical children do. They don't respond to the rewards and consequences, and it's very frustrating. A lot of times what you'll see with these kids is, that running away. They'll literally, some of them will run out of the school. I've had parents call me and say, yeah, the kid ran out of the building because, they got to that fight or flight mode, and they took the flight. Sometimes they'll withdraw from you emotionally, so they just tune in completely. That's also a protective way. It's a way to escape. Opposition is that fighting. So you have an oppositional child, that's that fight mode. Arguing, tantrums, and physical aggression, all part of that fight mode. So a lot of the traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but that's, the gold standard in a lot of mental health treatment is cognitive behavioral therapy. It doesn't really work with these kids. Not until they get their emotional regulation skills intact so that they can calm down enough in the moment so they can think and remember what someone told them to do, and they can remember the reward they're working for. So cognitive behavioral therapy is helpful once they have those emotional regulation skills, but not before. And it takes a long time to develop emotional regulation skills. So I wanted to just talk to you about a client of mine, because I do see clients at the center. And this is a client who, he's probably 13 now. But when I wrote this slide, he was 11. And he had been in care since he was 7. Very difficult home environment that he grew up in from 0 to 7. He lived with his mother, who was an active alcoholic. And the way the case came into child protection initially was Cal and his mom were drunk at a public swimming pool. They were both drunk. And someone called the police. And they found out that there were actually 2 other children in the family that were in the hotel room, younger children. And so they removed the children at that point, and as time went on, they found out that the kids had been physically abused for years by mother's boyfriend and sexually abused. They had witnessed things like their mother being raped at gunpoint, things like that. So Cal had quite a traumatic history when he came into therapy. And his sensory system was just way, out of sync. One of the first times I met with him, the foster mom was explaining to me that he was, I think he was maybe in kindergarten or 1st grade, and if the child sat next to him, what he ended up doing would be to punch. I mean, someone just got in his, space bubble. His first response was to hit. So that's how tuned up he was. He would tell you, I want friends. He would verbalize, I want to play with kids, I want friends, but in the moment, again, he couldn't do it. So we also found out, overstimulated by his environment at school. Most kids, when you meet them, they'll say what are their favorite times at school? Lunch and recess. Yep. Those were his 2 least favorite times because it was too loud. Too much stimulation in the lunchroom. If you've been in the lunchroom, it's a very loud place. There's a lot going on. There's bright lights. He couldn't stand it. And same with the playground. Lots of roughhousing and teasing. He couldn't stand it. So one of the things that we did at that point in the school was we pulled him out. I mean, he just could not tolerate it. And as what happens is these neural pathways get in the brain, and they get triggered each time they have a stressful environment that they're put in. So he was just getting triggered over and over and over again. So what we did was we took him, and he ate lunch in one of the teachers' lounges. They picked a few kids, 2 or 3 kids that would eat lunch with him. So he had a little social activity. And then recess he spent in the teacher's room helping her. And that just made, a whole bunch of problems go away at school. Because what was happening was he was hitting people, he was running away, all those responses. So now let's talk about learning. You're learning right now, hopefully. And the reason that you're learning is because I'm novel enough, hopefully, to you. You're not bored with me completely yet. And I'm providing a little bit of a challenge, and maybe I'm obviously talking to you about a few things that you haven't heard before. So you're kind of thinking them through. And that's stimulating enough to get you into that little blue zone where you're alert and you're paying attention. If I start telling you really horrible, awful stories continuously, you might get too tuned up and you might not even be listening to me anymore. You might start blocking me out as a way to regulate yourself. Or if you get really bored, you're going to daydream and you won't be paying attention at all. So you'll be too restful, too calm. So to learn, you have to be in that little blue square. You can see normal people that are normally wired, they're in that blue square. You know, there's a big chunk. If you look at the, again, that red line, almost anything new puts you out of the range of alertness and into the alarm and the fear. So what happens is kids are in the classroom, but because of what's going on internally, they cannot learn. They're not in that spot where they can think. And so what ends up happening is they'll get chunks, you know, they'll hear some of the stuff, but if they start thinking about something that happened at home, or if someone, you know, pokes them with a pencil, that's it. Then the next half hour, they're just getting back to normal. So they're not learning, and they look different. They're learning, their IQ often looks much lower than it actually is because they have these chunks missing of their learning. A lot of these kids get a diagnosis of ADD or ADHD that may or may not, I mean, they may have ADHD and trauma, that happens, but oftentimes they have just such anxiety that they're moving around, they're disrupting the classroom, and they look like they have ADHD, but they really don't. And sadly, you know, then they get put on medications that don't help, or maybe help a little bit, but don't solve the whole problem. And so people get frustrated because the medication isn't working, and sometimes the medication can actually make an anxious person worse. If you think about a stimulant medication being given to a child who's anxious, it doesn't work so well. So they also will get often a developmental delay diagnosis. So, you know, they may mild mental retardation. And, you know, not, again, that could be, a child can have mild mental retardation and be traumatized. But sometimes you don't know that that's the case. It could be that the gaps are so big in their learning that, that they just need time to catch up. And so those kids sometimes will improve. You'll see their IQs actually go up quite a bit. In school, a lot of times they're daydreaming, they're tuning out, they're not producing work according to the teachers. And sometimes they'll be disrupting other students in the classroom because they're so overstimulated in the classroom that they're just trying to get themselves under control, and they'll be bumping around and making noise. Sometimes they feel, you know, stupid. They'll say, "I can't learn," you know, that kind of thing. So I'm going to go back to Cal, and in his school, he was tested in the borderline range, but I don't think that was an accurate estimate of his IQ. And I'm hoping that when he is retested that his IQ will show some improvement, because he's definitely been able to learn more in the last couple years than when he initially came. He also was diagnosed with ADHD and was put on medication. I don't think it was helpful, and eventually his medications were changed so that he was taken off of that. Power struggles at home over homework were crazy. And the poor foster mom, I mean, she just, it was really hard to get him to do homework because he felt hopeless. He felt like, I can't learn, I'm stupid, you know. So there was no motivation. And so one of the things that we did was just say, you know what, we're not going to expect him to do homework at home. You know, he's going to do his learning at school. He was placed in it's called a self-contained classroom for part of the day. So he was in a smaller class with, you know, 5 or 6 kids for part of the day, where he really got some intensive instruction. And it was calm enough in there. It wasn't as stimulating as the classroom with 30 students. so that he was more able to focus. And he did start to learn and make some strides that were pretty amazing, given that smaller environment and just the less stress. Okay, so lastly, we're going to talk about relational effects. And, you know, everybody has kind of layers of people in their life, right? I mean, everybody has those people that you have a formal relationship with, people that you say hello to. Then you can move into casual relationships with people where you sort of know a few things about them, but you don't share a whole lot. Towards then into friendship, where there's an exchange of personal information and intimacy, a very close, trusting relationship. And most of us have in the formal, we'll pretty much let anybody in. We're very open. At casual interactions, you can see that we have still quite a few. And if you go down the line, as we get towards intimacy, we have less and less contacts and less people that we let into our world. If you look up on the scale there, the more relational damage, so the more trauma, especially trauma perpetrated by someone that is trustworthy for that child. So a parent, a caregiver, a grandparent, an older sibling. When the abuse or trauma occurs within that trusting relationship, you have that relationship damage that can have that long-term effect. Where you can see up there, there are less and less people allowed into that open relationship. They very quickly push people out and have really no one in their intimate circle. So what happens is when you cross, you'll know when you cross that line with a child, they will, either push you back or they'll push you out, one of the two. And, some of you might experience that when you're, getting to know your children, that they may not be as open and wanting to talk to you as you want them to be. And that's that relationship barrier where they start to feel unsafe, and that's it. You're kind of done. They often expect rejection and hurt from others, and so they sometimes even play out bad behaviors because they feel like it's coming anyway, might as well just do it now and get it over with, have the person get rid of me. That happens a lot with kids who are in pre-adoptive placements too, where that, especially if the family isn't aware that that barrier is there, they may push hard to connect with a child, and the child doesn't feel safe enough to connect, and so things really go awry. They also get really controlling. So if they feel like you're pushing into their intimacy space too much, they're going to try to control as much as they can. And so their behaviors can be very unpleasant, to say the least. A lot of these kids just are not likable when they've had that relationship damage. It's, they just aren't they're not soft and cuddly and warm like you want them to be, or like you think they might be. They have, not a lot of practice in social skills, so they don't always know the right things to say or the right social norms to follow because they haven't had a lot of experience in relationships because they push people out so quick. They don't have that long-term relationship. So things like sharing, allowing other people time to talk, listening, some of those skills, they just don't really have them. And they have to be taught those skills. So they withdraw, sometimes they don't have friends, or as they get older, then they tend to have the negative peer group, where they'll find the other kids that are sort of doing poorly, kind of the outcasts, and that's who they'll hook up with. So, I'll go back to Cal. When he was first placed in foster care, he totally had no trust for this foster mom. And he was the older of 3 siblings, and so his response to her was just kind of shut her out. He was in charge of the younger siblings, and when she would try to discipline the younger siblings, he would be like, no, I'm dealing with it. He was 7. You can imagine this foster mom's frustration to have a 7-year-old, sort of in charge of the 2 younger siblings. But that was his model. He felt like she was not trustworthy, and he wasn't going to let him let the siblings have any contact with her. And I had the opportunity to see him through 2 pre-adoptive placements. And so I was able to see kind of what happened with him as he went into those. And the first placement he was put in, the family, sadly, I think just did not have an understanding of his relationship problems. And so they insisted that he call them mother and father immediately, right away. When he tried to talk to them about his birth mother, who even though she was horribly abusive to him, he loved her, worried about her, wondered if she was alive. He was just longing for her still. And when he would try to talk about her, they would say, no, you don't understand, she's a bad person, you should, kind of like her. And needless to say, the placement disrupted for him rather quickly. And he just, emotionally went down so quickly. So that was clearly not a good spot for him to be in. So then the second time around, we got a different pre-adoptive home, and this woman had a much better understanding of his needs. And as far as I know, the adoption has gone through, so it was a success. He sadly moved out of town into this adoptive home. So I haven't been able to maintain contact with him in therapy, but it looked like it went well. So one of the things that will happen, you'll probably see with your kids, is they get referred to therapy, individual therapy, which I'm a practitioner of, so I'm definitely not against it. But the idea that 1 hour of individual therapy a week is going to fix, in my case, like with Cal, 7 years of abuse and trauma, not really. Just doesn't happen. Kids who've had trauma need a whole team of providers that are going to give them the treatment and the experiences that they need. So that means, the parents or the caregivers, whoever they are, foster parents, adoptive parents, need to be part of the treatment team, and they need to know the things that they can do during the day, during the week, in between that 1 hour of therapy that are going to help this child. And usually the school also needs to be involved in the treatment team. Sometimes occupational therapy or other kinds of speech therapy, sometimes even, is going to be necessary for these kids. The occupational therapy can help them with that emotional regulation. And sometimes speech therapy can help them with some of the missing social skills that those gaps in their learning. And I know that sounds strange, speech therapy, but one of the things speech therapists do is work on the social norms of conversation, which if you haven't had relationships, you don't know. So you really need multiple interventions usually a week. Usually these are kids who are going to need someone, maybe a paraprofessional that comes out to the home twice a week and provides some what they call skill training. So the therapist is working on skills in the office for that 1 hour, but then there's someone in the home training the parents how to work with that child a couple other times a week. Maybe they're also going to an occupational therapist or speech therapist. So it's really multiple interventions for healing the trauma. Comments, questions? Kids done?
Thank you so much.